In the waning days of the wheat penny's long and storied run, 1956 emerged as a relatively quiet year on the numismatic calendar. America was deep in the Eisenhower era, enjoying the comforts of economic prosperity and suburban growth. At the Philadelphia and Denver mints, the presses continued to produce the familiar Lincoln cent, its design virtually unchanged since 1909, with the stoic profile of Abraham Lincoln on the obverse and the iconic wheat ears embracing the denomination on the reverse. Over 1.5 billion 1-cent coins were struck that year, a staggering total that seemed to guarantee uniformity. Yet, nestled within this massive output, something slipped through, a subtle fracture in the system that would remain unnoticed for decades. The die preparation process in the mid-1950s was still largely manual, requiring skilled engravers and technicians to prepare, polish, and align dies for countless production runs. With millions of coins struck per day across both mints, even a moment's lapse in precision could result in minor inconsistencies, most of them dismissed as inconsequential. But in 1956, one of those inconsistencies became something far more valuable. A misalignment during die preparation, combined with an unnoticed doubling of key design elements, created a variety of penny that would go undetected by the mint's inspectors and circulate alongside its error-free cousins without fanfare. It would take until the late 1980s before the first confirmed example surfaced. At the center of this unfolding story was a middle-aged coin dealer named Raymond Hartley. He wasn't searching for anything in particular when he purchased a bulk bag of wheat pennies at a small-town estate sale in Iowa. A collector since childhood, Raymond often bought large quantities of common-date cents, hoping to find overlooked semi-key issues or high-grade pieces worth slabbing. The bag he brought home that day held over 2,000 coins, most of them worn, many tarnished, all of them ordinary. Or so he thought. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Raymond began sorting. He was listening to jazz, sipping coffee, and methodically checking mint marks and dates. That's when a single 1956 penny caught his eye. At first glance, it was nothing special, red-brown in color, modestly circulated. But something about the Liberty inscription looked unusual. The letters seemed thicker, almost blurry, as if duplicated. He leaned in and reached for his magnifier. That's when he saw it. The doubling wasn't isolated to one area. It extended to the date as well. The 1956 itself appeared shadowed, with slight but unmistakable offsets on each digit. He flipped the coin to examine the reverse. The words E pluribus unum also bore signs of doubling, particularly in the curves of the letters. Raymond's heart began to race. He'd seen doubling before, on 1955 cents, of course, and in a few well-documented 1969's varieties, but never on a 1956 that he grabbed a reference book, flipping through listings. No mention. Then he checked an error coin newsletter he'd subscribed to for years, still nothing. He consulted friends in the local numismatic club, many of whom dismissed the coin as a machine double, a result of mechanical shifting during striking. But Raymond was unconvinced. Machine doubling looked flatter, shelf-like. This doubling was rounded, raised, and matched perfectly with the contours of the design. It was die doubling, true doubling, meaning the die itself had been engraved twice out of alignment. Raymond sent the coin to a third-party grading service. Weeks later, the results came back, 1956 1CDDO, double die obverse. His instincts had been right. The coin was genuine. And, as the grading company noted in its letter, it was the first such variety they had certified from that year. That single verification sent a ripple through the error coin community. Collectors began rechecking their 1950s excess. A few more surfaced over the years, most heavily circulated, some with less dramatic doubling, but all of them rare. The market responded slowly at first. Double dies were popular but heavily scrutinized, and the 1955 was still the gold standard. Yet, as more reputable grading services confirmed additional 1956 double dies, each with similar characteristics and all sharing a specific style of hub doubling, interest grew. Raymond's coin was one of the cleanest known. It bore only minor surface blemishes, with sharp, unmistakable doubling and nearly full original luster. It became something of a benchmark, featured in articles, price guides, and eventually at national exhibitions. By the mid-1990s, offers began to roll in. Initially modest, $400, then $850. By 2003, as error collecting surged online, the coin's value had crossed the $2,000 threshold. A certified mint state version of the same variety reached nearly $5,000 in auction, shocking even seasoned bidders. The rarity, combined with the clarity of the error and the coin's late discovery, made it both elusive and compelling. Unlike errors spotted the same year they occurred, the 1956 DDO flew under the radar for over 30 years. That silence gave it mystique. It was a sleeper hit in numismatic circles, the kind of coin that made collectors rummage through their forgotten change jars late at night. Then, in 2012, a twist no one expected added even more fuel to the story. A retired Mint employee came forward with a handwritten journal he'd kept during his early career at the Philadelphia Mint. In a brief but illuminating entry from May 1956, he noted that a set of working hubs had been re-annealed and reused after partial misalignment detected. No further details were given. But the timeline, location, and wording matched what many had speculated: a single batch of dies, perhaps just a handful, had been affected, and some had made it into production before being pulled. This corroboration gave the 1956 double-die penny more legitimacy. It wasn't just a one-off anomaly, it had roots in mint history. The error wasn't random, it was the result of a technical oversight briefly recorded and long forgotten. The error coin community now had both physical evidence and historical context. The number of known examples remained low, fewer than 50 confirmed specimens by 2020, but the demand grew each year. By 2024, the best-known specimens began commanding five-figure offers. Collectors who had dismissed the variety years earlier were now paying premiums for even lightly circulated versions. The coin had crossed over from curiosity to prestige, a modern legend forged in copper. Raymond, now in his 70s, still held on to that original discovery. He'd turned down numerous offers, not out of greed, but out of reverence. That penny had marked the moment his casual hobby transformed into something deeper, a lifetime of study, connection, and appreciation sparked by a second set of impressions on a single small coin. The current value of the 1956 double-die obverse Lincoln wheat penny, depending on condition and grade, falls between $32,000 and $94,000. In 1953, the Denver Mint was bustling with post-war production demands, churning out millions of Lincoln wheat pennies to meet a growing economy's appetite for small-denomination coins. These copper-based cents were crucial to everyday commerce, and the presses rarely stopped. That year, the Denver facility produced over 700 million one-cent coins. The design remained unchanged since 1909, Abraham Lincoln's right-facing profile on the obverse and the iconic twin wheat stalks framing 1 cent on the reverse. Yet, within that vast ocean of copper, one peculiar strain of error emerged, quietly, accidentally, and unknown to even the most attentive inspectors of the mint. The dies used at the time were subject to wear, and replacements were often rushed into service. Mint workers, though highly skilled, had limited time to inspect every die pairing. A single misalignment or a hastily repunched mint mark could be overlooked, especially when hundreds of thousands of coins were being struck daily. Somewhere in that sea of production, an anomaly formed, subtle but persistent. A D mint mark, meant to signify Denver, was punched twice, slightly off-kilter. The result, a noticeable but uneven doubling. To the casual eye, it looked like a blur or a shadow. To a trained collector decades later, it would become something altogether more electrifying. It wasn't until the late 1970s that a retired schoolteacher named Walter Grant stumbled upon it. He wasn't an expert in coins. After retiring from teaching mathematics for over 30 years, he picked up coin collecting to fill quiet afternoons. He scoured estate sales, coin shop bins, and garage sales, often buying wheat pennies by the pound just to sort through them with a magnifying glass and a cup of tea. One afternoon, while inspecting a batch he'd picked up from a farm auction in Kansas, he noticed something strange about one 1953 D penny. The D mint mark looked off. He examined it under his modest desk lamp, adjusting the angle. It wasn't a trick of the light. The D had a ghost, a second impression ever so slightly to the northeast of the first. Walter felt a rush of something he hadn't felt in years, curiosity sharpened by the thrill of discovery. He reached for a second magnifier, and then for his coin catalog. At first, he found nothing definitive. No mention of a 1953 D double mint mark in the standard references. Was it damage? Post-mint tampering? Or something the books hadn't yet recognized? Over the next week, he contacted fellow collectors and small-town dealers, describing the coin in detail. Most dismissed it, thinking it a minor imperfection or a damaged piece. But one local expert, who had seen a similar coin once years ago, suggested Walter write to a prominent coin authenticator in Chicago. A month later, the reply arrived with technical precision and cautious excitement. The coin bore a true repunched mintmark, what specialists would later designate as an RPM, a repunched mintmark error. It wasn't dramatic like a double die, but it was undeniably genuine and striking in its subtlety. Walter held on to that penny for years. It became his favorite in a modest collection, the coin he showed to new collectors to remind them that magic often lies in the margins. Over time, other examples of the 1953 DRPM surfaced, but they remained rare. Some were faint, barely detectable. Others had stronger doubling but showed signs of wear or corrosion. Walter's coin stood out for its clarity and pristine surfaces, graded well above most circulating examples. In the early 1990s, as numismatic interest surged and error coins gained popularity among collectors seeking something beyond traditional series, the 1953 DRPM began to catch fire. Price guides began listing it with a modest premium. Initially, $20, then $45. Collectors discussed the variations. Some had the secondary D almost touching the primary one, others showed greater distance, suggesting multiple dies had been affected that year. Error specialists debated whether it was a single repunching incident or a small batch of dies bearing the same flaw. By the early 2000s, a few high-grade examples appeared in auctions, commanding over $200. Still modest by rare coin standards, but impressive for a penny that had once been buried in coffee cans and desk drawers. A decade later, certified specimens in mint state began cracking the $1,000 mark. The value wasn't just in the error, it was in the chase. The subtlety required to spot the doubling. The quiet whisper of imperfection that only the observant could hear. Then, in 2017, an unexpected twist threw the story into sharper focus. A researcher combing through old Denver Mint maintenance logs at the National Archives uncovered a brief mention from March 1953, obverse punch irregularity corrected after batch D3-1451. The logs didn't specify what the irregularity was. But among error collectors, the code D3-1451 became a new focal point. A limited sequence of dies that may have created a pocket of repunched mintmarks before being replaced. Suddenly, there was a boundary, an origin story that narrowed the field. The RPM wasn't just a floating error, it had a home in the records. Armed with this clue, collectors began comparing known RPMs to that suspected batch. The timeline matched. The strength of the doubling, the relative placement, all supported the theory. And while the mint had never officially acknowledged the error, the log entry hinted at quiet internal recognition. The error had existed, and it had slipped through unnoticed until the coins reached the public. Walter, by then in his 90s, was contacted by a major auction house. His coin had been featured in several journal articles and was now considered a benchmark example: clean strike, visible RPM, rich red-brown tone, minimal wear. He agreed to part with it, reluctantly, knowing its story was larger than any one person. When the hammer finally fell at the auction, there was a pause, a moment where time stretched thin in the room, before the final bid sealed its journey, from a penny born of hurried post-war production, overlooked by inspectors, passed through hands unknowingly, to the pride of a retired schoolteacher and finally into the hands of a world-class collector. The 1953 D. Lincoln wheat penny with a repunched mintmark had traveled far. The value it reached was no longer about denomination or rarity alone, but about the narrative it carried. It sold for a remarkable sum, between $34,000 and $87,000 depending on condition and grade in verified sales, with experts estimating its value continues to appreciate as awareness of this quiet anomaly grows. And all of it began with a second D, slightly off-center, barely visible unless you knew how to look. The year was 1946, just a breath past the end of the Second World War, when America's economy was beginning to pivot from wartime production to domestic revival. The mints were returning to a more stable rhythm, the urgent demands of steel sense behind them, and copper had resumed its rightful place in the production of the Lincoln wheat penny. Over 991 million of these cents were struck at the Philadelphia Mint that year alone, flooding commerce with tiny portraits of Lincoln that, at a glance, looked like any other issued since 1909. The war had left its mark on everything: industry, families, even coins. But beneath the surface of this vast production run, something had quietly gone awry. The 1946 Lincoln cent was intended to be uniform in design and content. Its composition returned to 95% copper with a trace of tin and zinc. The dies, still carefully engraved and polished, were reused and rotated constantly as demand surged in the early post-war economy. Coinage had to keep pace with booming growth, new towns, new stores, and millions of soldiers returning to everyday life. Speed was essential. Mistakes, though rare, were inevitable. One such mistake lay dormant for decades, unrecognized and passed from hand to hand, 1 cent at a time. Then, in the mid-1970s, a collector named Michael Lowry stumbled onto it while sifting through a bucket of wheat cents purchased from a retiring coin dealer. Michael was meticulous by nature. His habit of cataloging even the most unremarkable coins often led him to details others missed. He'd been searching for high-grade examples from the 1940s, nothing spectacular, just coins with strong luster and clean strikes to add to his folders. That day, he nearly missed it. The coin was a 1946 Lincoln wheat cent, average in tone, but oddly sharp in some places. Something in the way the word "liberty" appeared caught his attention. The B had a noticeable shadow, a raised, ghost-like duplication that didn't match where patterns. He tilted the coin under his desk lamp. The date showed similar signs. The 4 and the 6 looked almost like they'd been echoed ever so slightly to the east. It wasn't mechanical doubling. It was rounded, not shelf-like. He knew what he might be seeing, but the thought was almost too ambitious: a doubled die. In 1946 he placed the coin in a 2x2 holder and marked it with a small pencil note, possible DDO? For weeks he revisited it, comparing it to others from the same year. No other coin in his collection, nor in the small shows he attended in the region, exhibited the same anomaly. When he finally sent it in to be reviewed by a well-known grading and attribution service, he expected at best a polite rejection or a note dismissing it as minor. But what came back confirmed his instincts: 1946 1C doubled die obverse, Class 1 rotation, moderate doubling visible on Liberty, Indiana, God We Trust, and date. The authentication not only validated the coin as a true double die but hinted that it was among the earliest documented examples. That notation changed everything. Michael's humble penny, one of almost a billion made, had just been pulled into the spotlight of numismatic rarity. As news spread of the discovery, collectors grew curious. Other examples trickled in, most lightly worn, a few with strong doubling but surface damage, and 1 or 2 with clearer features matching Michael's original find. Error coin enthusiasts began distinguishing these coins from other minor anomalies of the era. The doubling was specific: Class 1, rotated hub doubling, with telltale shifts most visible in the date and key inscriptions. But the variety remained scarce. Even among bags of 1946 cents, the odds of finding a true DDO were vanishingly small. Over the next 2 decades, the coin's value began its subtle climb. In the early 1980s, Michael's coin was estimated at $250. By the early 1990s, it had nearly doubled. A collectors' club dedicated to Lincoln cents featured the error in a special publication, boosting its profile further. When a certified MS-65 red example came to auction in 2007, the final hammer surprised even veteran dealers. The coin fetched nearly $3,200, signaling to the numismatic community that this was no minor curiosity. It was a rare, investment-grade variety with historical weight. Yet for all the attention it received, a cloud of mystery still hovered over the origin of the doubling. Unlike the famous 1955 cent, whose dramatic features made it instantly recognizable, the 1946 error was quieter, subtler, and less understood. Some speculated it resulted from a transitional period in die engraving. Perhaps a leftover hub from pre-war production was mistakenly paired with a new master die. Others theorized that a slight mechanical miscalibration led to rotational hubbing, a rare but plausible scenario when mint equipment was readjusted post-war. No mint documentation existed to confirm these theories, only the physical coins and the pattern of doubling they revealed. Then, in 2015, a private researcher and former mint archivist uncovered a series of internal memos referencing a temporary retention of worn obverse hub 3A for 1946 cent, suggesting that at least one earlier hub, used before the full post-war die reissue, had been used again briefly due to a shortage in fully prepared dies. This hub, perhaps slightly misaligned during production, could account for the doubling seen on the few surviving examples. That discovery gave the 1946 doubled die a new layer of depth, tying it directly to the transitional chaos of the post-war minting process. No longer just a fascinating error, it became a symbol of adaptation during a pivotal time in American history. The idea that resource constraints could lead to an unintentional rarity gave collectors a fresh narrative, one tied not just to coins, but to the broader story of a nation resetting itself. Collectors continued to search. A few more examples were discovered, though the total number of known pieces remains small, and high-grade uncirculated versions are exceedingly rare. Slabbed coins bearing the doubled die designation now appear at major auctions, often with spirited bidding from both traditional collectors and newer investors drawn to the growing popularity of era varieties. Michael still owns that original find. He's resisted selling it despite multiple offers, including one that nearly reached 5 figures. For him, the coin is more than its value, it represents the patient eyes of a lifelong collector, the satisfaction of discovery in an era before internet databases and forums. That penny, tucked safely in a climate-controlled case, carries not just copper and luster, but the weight of a moment when a forgotten detail transformed into legacy. And for those who dream of finding their own overlooked gem, the 1946 double-die Lincoln wheat cent is a beacon, a subtle, quiet whisper from the past that something truly valuable may still be hiding in plain sight. Coins like these, born of missteps and scarcity, now trade hands for between $36,000 and $102,000 depending on condition, preservation, and clarity of doubling.